Welcome to The Wrong Stuff, everybody. How you doing, Guy?
I am doing good, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing better than Kristi Noem's animals.
That is both of them. Yes, that is quite true. I'm glad to hear it.
I assume you saw this story. So for those who don't know, Kristi Noem is the governor of South Dakota. She's on the short list to be Donald Trump's running mate. In fact, I just wrote a piece at the Daily Beast. Actually, I think I was leaning more toward J.D. Vance and Elise Stefanik. But, you know, I said that Kristi Noem is in the running. So she's very relevant. But now there's this piece. Apparently, so Noem has a new book out. And as Martin Pingelly or Pingelly, I'm not sure, at The Guardian, he actually wrote a nice review of my book, has a piece out describing it. Have you read this yet?
I have seen it, yes. And I read most of it.
Okay. I would like to read an excerpt from this Guardian piece. And you can feel free to jump in as I go, or we could talk about it at the end. But I think it's interesting. So let me read it. Cricket was a wire hair pointer, about 14 months old, the South Dakota governor writes in her new book, adding that the dog, a female, had an aggressive personality and needed to be trained to be used for hunting pheasant. By taking Cricket on a pheasant hunt with older dogs, Noem says, she hoped to calm the young dog down and begin to teach her how to behave. Unfortunately, Cricket ruined the hunt, going out of her mind with excitement, chasing all those birds and having the time of her life. Noem describes calling Cricket, then using an electronic collar. I'm sorry. If you're a dog lover, this is a trigger warning right here. Using an electronic collar to attempt to bring her under control. Nothing worked. Then on the way home after the hunt, as Noem stopped to talk to a local family, Cricket escaped Noem's trunk and attacked the family's chickens, grabbing one chicken at a time, crunching it to death with one bite, then dropping it to attack another. Cricket, the untrainable dog, Noem writes, behaved like a trained assassin. When Noem finally grabbed Cricket, she says the dog whipped around to bite me. Then, as the chicken's owners wept, Noem repeatedly apologized, wrote the shocked family a check for the price they asked, and helped them dispose of the carcass littering the scene of the crime. We're only 2 pages into this, Guy, I hope.
I was going to say, I often hear from dog lovers, but there are no bad dogs, there are only bad owners. And if that's true, I would love to know the full context of what led to this episode, because it's difficult. Now, I'm not an animal person, Matt. I don't know about you. I get it from my mother. I don't like dogs. I never have. But I find it very difficult to believe that the sweet dog named Cricket suddenly had a psychotic break and decided to turn into a ravenous killer on a random spring day, and there were no signs of this beforehand.
I mean, Joe Biden let his dog bite like 25 Secret Service men before he sent him back to Delaware. Kristi Noem, a couple chickens, man, and she's going to take you out, baby. All right. I will continue. Through it all, Noem says, Cricket was the picture of pure joy. I hated that dog, Noem writes, adding that Cricket had proved herself untrainable, dangerous to anyone she came in contact with, and less than worthless as a hunting dog. At that moment, Noem says, I realized I had to put her down. Noem, who also represented her state in Congress for 8 years, got her gun, then led Cricket to a gravel pit. Probably shouldn't be laughing. Again, not laughing at we laugh because we can't cry.
You're laughing with the dead dog. Right.
Yes. It was not a pleasant job, she writes, but it had to be done. And after it was over, I realized another unpleasant job had to be done. Incredibly, Noem's tale of slaughter is not finished.
Tale of Slaughter. That sounds like a band name. That was my college band.
Her family, she writes, also owned a male goat that was nasty and mean because it had not been castrated. Same.
True for all of us.
The goat smelled disgusting again. Musky, rancid, and loved to chase Noem's children, knocking them down and ruining their clothes. Noem decided to kill the unnamed goat the same way she had just killed Cricket the dog. But though she dragged him to a gravel pit, the goat jumped as she shot and therefore survived the wound.
Oh.
Noem says she went back to her truck, retrieved another shell, then hurried back to the gravel pit and put him down. At that point, Noem writes, she realized a construction crew had watched her kill both animals. The startled workers. I love it when you are so outrageous that construction workers are disturbed by your violent behavior.
I'm watching in horror as you perpetrate this from their perch.
You've offended the sensibilities of the construction workers. The startled workers swiftly got back to work, probably because they didn't want to be shot. This is me. Opinion.
They pretended they didn't see anything. That's right.
Nothing, ma'am.
Yeah, exactly.
The startled workers swiftly got back to work, she writes, only for a school bus to arrive and drop off Noem's children. Kennedy looked around confused, Noem writes, of her daughter, who asked, "Hey, where's Cricket?" On Friday, reaction to news of Noem's description of killing her dog and her goat included satire. The Barack Obama advisor turned podcaster Tommy Vitor calling the governor Jeffrey Dahmer with veneers, a reference to a famous serial killer and a recent scandal over Noem's cosmetic dental treatment. So, what do you make of that, man?
It's like an R-rated Old Yeller. Like that, did you see someone took Winnie the Pooh recently and distorted it into some kind of exploitation horror B movie?
Because Winnie the Pooh no longer has copyright protection, right? It's public domain or something.
So it's only a matter of time until someone takes 101 Dalmatians or a story like that and turns it. And this will be the premise for the perverse horror remake of some beloved children's property about dogs.
I wonder if Kristi Noem has like a coat made out of that dog's hair or the other many. God knows, look, she's clearly a serial offender. Two in one day. Has she left a wake of animals in her trail? I mean, in her path. I was reminded, Guy, many years ago when I worked at the Daily Caller, in 2012, there was this huge scandal because Mitt Romney had put on the roof of his car, Seamus the dog, and this dog carrier cage or something. And Romney claimed, and Romney's kids claimed, they thought, by the way, I think Romney's kids told this story thinking it was like going to humanize their dad and make him seem like a good guy.
And it made him seem like a sociopath.
People really like their dog. And so there was this huge scandal, like this lasted for weeks, where like Romney was just being destroyed over Seamus the dog. And then I was at the Daily Caller, and my colleague Jim Treacher, someone left a comment, and this is why you have to read the comments, even though they're mostly disgusting, because someone left a comment that said, "Oh yeah, Obama ate a dog." And so Jim Treacher found out that in one of Obama's memoirs, when he was in Africa visiting his father, he ate dog, and Treacher wrote it. It became a huge story, and it totally killed the Seamus the dog story. Because what happened is every time somebody would tweet something mean about Romney, somebody would retweet over top of it or quote tweet it, "Obama killed a dog," or "Obama ate a dog." So it really hurt. It really hurt Romney, and it really hurt Obama. But here's my question for you, Guy Denton. As I mentioned, she's on the short list to be Trump's VEEP. Does this news hurt or help her chances?
I don't know. Americans really do love their dogs, potentially including our own beloved former president. So I'm not sure if it helps her. However, I am skeptical of the fact that any woman is particularly at an advantage in this selection process to begin with, because Trump doesn't want to be overshadowed. And I think this is crucial. I would be really interested in hearing your reason for why you think Vance is a strong candidate too, because that's my going theory. It's why the idea of a Tucker Carlson VP pick was never feasible, because Trump won't let anyone steal his thunder, and Trump also demands unquestioning loyalty. But what Trump needs, if Trump is going to make a shrewd VP pick, then he needs to pick someone who's going to balance him out in some way, or who's going to fill in some kind of gap in his campaign and in his appeal. And in that way, I think picking a woman, who does he need to appeal to? Suburbanites, women, minority voters, which means someone like a Kristi Noem or a Tim Scott is the intelligent choice. But granted, if what you're trying to do is appeal to the mind of the ordinary suburban American woman, then a vice presidential pick who wrote in graphic detail about slaughtering animals in her backyard may not be the most prudent choice, and may have ruined their chances before they even began.
All right, so first, I'm not sure Trump likes dogs. In fact, I think he's like the first modern president who didn't have a dog. I mean,
well, Trump did like the dog who invaded the terrorist's home and murdered the terrorist. If you remember that, he was a beautiful.
Okay, so my theory, and who knows? I mean, with Trump, he could pick. Remember that kid that famous meme with that kid mowing the lawn in front of the White House?
Yes.
Like Trump could pick that kid to be his running mate. It's unclear. Like Trump could pick anybody for any reason. He could wake up and whatever. But I do think that the one thing we know about Trump is he's pissed off about Mike Pence. Mike Pence let him down. And so I think he wants to avoid that. So he wants someone who's going to be very loyal, okay? But here's the thing, and this is the reason in my Daily Beast piece, I actually prioritized Elise Stefanik over Noem, because at the time, this is before the dog thing came out, at the time I thought Elise Stefanik and Noem are both bootlickers, but Stefanik is more of a killer. And that's what Trump wants. She's willing to kill for Trump. And now Noem has proven that I think she has that in her too. So I think this helps her. I think this helps Noem.
Oh, she's willing to kill small cutesy animals. I don't know if that's quite the same thing. I think Elise might still have an edge in that regard.
All right. Well, speaking of vice presidents, people who ran for. Speaking of vice presidential running mates, I was reminded of this blast from the past guy, and I recently discovered that not everyone remembers this, but many years ago, when you were but a tyke, Sarah Palin, and I think this was after McCain-Palin lost, but she was very prominent at this point. I think this was after the race. I could be wrong. But anyway, at Thanksgiving, so yeah, it would have had to have been after they lost, right? Either way.
Yeah. Didn't have much to be thankful about.
So at Thanksgiving, Palin did this interview with like MSNBC. And in the back, I don't even know who did the videos from MSNBC. She did an interview, and in the background, there's like a turkey processing plant, and you could see some guy like holding a turkey by like both legs, pushing them down into some like God knows what machinery. So let's just watch this video as a blast from the past.
Appreciation for this great country. There's so many good Americans who are just desiring of their government to kind of get out of the way and allow them to grow and progress and allow our businesses to grow and progress. So great appreciation for those who share that value. And it was a blast. Every day was just a blast out there on the trail. Any other future plans? Plans just include getting through the budget process that we're going through right now.
I don't even know if that was a turkey. I don't even know what that guy was doing.
It looked like a prop. It looked like a costume. And he was varnishing the edges of the costume inside that machine. But that must have been a golden period to be a writer for Saturday Night Live. Because you didn't even have to try, surely.
It was good to be a writer for anything. I had a blast back then, man. It was so fun. But you would think that an advanced team would scope out where the backdrop for the candidate and what's behind her and what kind of atrocities are going to be committed behind her.
Well, I love that for the first half of the clip, the man perpetrating the atrocities is sort of awkwardly staring into the camera lens and at the failed vice presidential candidate, wondering what's happening, before eventually he just decides, oh, well, it'll continue with his day, unfazed.
He's somewhere. There's going to be a war crime commission that will look into this.
It's an unsolved. We never got to the bottom of it, Matt. It's true, and I had forgotten. I had mostly forgotten about that clip until you reminded me of it earlier, and now it's back now that it's back at the forefront of my mind. I want answers.
And one thing we've learned, I think, from the last couple of days is that a president may indeed have immunity if he's acting in official business. But I don't think a vice presidential running mate has immunity for some of the crimes that they may or may not have committed. So, again, The Hague knows who they should be looking, at least interviewing here. So,
yes. Or an immunity, neither immunity against crimes, nor crimes they have committed, nor a cushion against incredibly stupid things and injudicious things they may have written or said for no clear reason.
Well, the sad thing for me is most of the stupid things I may have written or said are all public and very easily searchable. So I feel their pain. Okay.
Yes.
Before we move on, any final thoughts about what we're now calling Doggate? Or what was the dog's name again? Do we remember?
Oh, not Cricket. Cricketgate.
Yes. I think we call it Cricketgate. Final thoughts, or shall I move on?
Cricketgate. Well, I hope that justice will be served soon. This is only the beginning of what I'm sure will be an extensive criminal probe.
All right. Now I'm going to go to your old boss, Jonah Goldberg, who was on CNN doing the Lord's work. And guy, I want to tell you the reason that I want to show. There's two reasons I want to show this video, right? So he was on CNN and he's trying to make a kind of contrarian point at CNN. He's outnumbered probably, and he's trying to make like a pro-Israel point and criticize the college students, the leftists, radicals on campus, which is hard to do. And he's trying to make kind of a philosophical, intellectual point. So I agree with the substance of what he had to say, but I also, as a former CNN contributor, I deeply empathize with his plight because
yes.
I have tried to do what he did, and it usually doesn't work because you get constantly interrupted,
yes,
and laughed at and outnumbered. So let's go to the tape, and then we'll hear. I may stop it as we go, but I'd love to get you to weigh in.
Look, I think the anti-Semitism stuff, particularly Passover, is a big issue. It's a legitimate issue to talk about. It's a serious issue, and I think there's a lot of anti-Semitic stuff going on out there. But when you're saying you're Hamas, when you're praising Hamas, when you're praising Hezbollah, when you're saying you're going to globalize the Intifada.
Excuse me, I'm so sorry.
Okay, right there. He's trying to make, and who knows, like, other people have probably talked. Now it's his turn. He's trying to make this difficult point, and she's interrupting him right away. And it's with a little, like, excuse me. I mean, so what are you going to do? But I can't tell you how hard it is to do this and to be interrupted. It really messes up your train of thought.
Well, one of the things that always stood out to me in working with Jonah and paying attention to what he would do on CNN was simply how outdated this format feels in a lot of ways, but also how sort of sinister this format is in quite an understated way. Because it's designed, CNN, we'll go through the entire clip, but CNN gets exactly what CNN wants out of the way this clip turned out. which is not nuanced analysis of a sensitive social political issue from both sides of the spectrum, but a shouting match between two famous people with big social media platforms that they in turn can capitalize on and get a lot of extra attention on, even though ultimately there's not very much substance underneath it. That's what the media ecosystem feeds on. And that's why, in a lot of ways, I think, I don't just want to sing our own praises of what we're trying to do on this show, Matt, but I think the market of long-form podcasting that's developed in recent years and has sort of supplanted traditional cable news in a lot of ways, you can see why that's occurred by watching a clip like this and how sort
Amen.
of and how
Amen.
sort of fatuous a lot of the discussion really becomes.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and play it. Actually, this is a rare instance where Jonah does finally get to make some interesting points, but amid interruptions, and you're right, it's not conducive. I'll hold my thoughts on that till the end.
So sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but
I'm going to finish my point. It means you're pro-terrorist. If you were celebrating Hamas, you're a pro-terrorist.
I'm not disputing that. What I'm saying,
that's my point.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is there are selective quotes that are being taken, often not from students themselves. In the encampments in Colombia, they have said this. There are Jewish students who are actually part of this. And they are being used to say, wait, let me just...
Let me finish my point.
No, that's true. But
no, that's
many
true.
People have said that the action of bringing police into a group of people who are already feeling that they are sort of representative of the oppressed, who are inspired by what happened with George Floyd in 2020 and seeing what is happening in Gaza, that has only really acted as a catalyst here. And so I wonder at the wisdom of bringing in the armed police into what is essentially a university campus. To try and resolve
I question the wisdom of having a double standard that says it's okay to shout hateful pro-terrorist things at Jews, but you have to have
no
total...
one's endorsing that.
A lot of people are endorsing that. A lot of people aren't condemning it. Yeah, a lot of people aren't condemning it. And I agree with you. Universities and the Democratic Party and the left have a huge problem trying to figure out how to cut this Gordian knot that they've created for themselves. But that doesn't mean I have to sort of condone or not call out. I got a lot of scars from calling out horrible statements on the right over the last 10 years. I call out anti-Semitism and bigotry all the time on the right.
Of course.
I don't hear a lot of that from sort of squad-adjacent type people calling out this stuff.
That's a good point, too. I mean, Jonah, people like us and Jonah, we're more than happy to call out the right. We do it all the time. And now this is an opportunity where Jonah could provide some real diversity of opinion on that show. And I think he did. And I'm glad that he had the time to do it. But sometimes you get interrupted and then they move on. Like you don't get the chance to expound or you lose your train of thought. So I'm with you. I think that in this case, that clip, I think actually provided some insight, but generally speaking, I've become such a big fan of like podcast, man, in terms of getting information.
No, I agree. But to that point, no, I think you're absolutely right. And that's one of the things that always distinguished the conservative movement and ideally should distinguish the conservative movement, but it was capable of policing itself, of institutions within the ecosystem the ecosystem that conservatives worked in and the ecosystems tried to develop, not only existed to attack and criticize the left, but also existed to police the right and to keep the right in line and to prevent the tent from from expanding too widely or from becoming torn and frayed as the movement grew and grew. But nowadays, leaving aside the fact that nowadays it's a lot more difficult to toe that line than it used to be, trying to convey that within the context of a 5-minute hit on cable news that's purely built around finding 10 seconds that can be isolated on Twitter to go viral, is fairly counterintuitive.
I forget the guy's name, but there's a great book called "Amusing Ourselves to Death" that came out have you read it in the early 1980s?
Not a while ago, but yes.
It's a really thin little book. Everyone should get it. And it's incredibly prescient. Again, I think it was in the early 80s. And the guy says something to the effect of, it's impossible to do philosophy on TV. And I think he's like, it is really hard to make a nuanced point. Like, I'll give you an example. It's actually a somewhat timely example because what's his name? Weinstein, Harvey Weinstein, I guess, just got out on a technicality, which is crazy, man.
Yes.
It's like Bill Cosby and Weinstein both get out. Wow. But back when I was a CNN contributor, back when the Harvey Weinstein story happened, and I was on, prime time like 3 nights a week at this point. And so we had talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. And the only thing to really say about it is, this is horrible. This is reprehensible. Wow. I mean, that's what you have to say. And so after like the 3rd or 4th time that I was supposed to talk about it, I made the mistake of trying to broaden it out. And I started with the caveat, obviously what Harvey Weinstein is accused of doing is horrific. And everyone here clearly condemns that. But I do think there's another point to be made when you look at someone like, say, Aziz Ansari. I don't know if you remember that story.
Of course.
Where there are men who feel like the rules have changed and they're not sure what the rules are. And maybe there needs to be a conversation about what is appropriate and what isn't. Like, and at this point, I was on with 2 female Democrats who, both of whom I was very friendly with. And one of them, we'd even hung out with my wife and sort of casually. And they both on air turned on me as I was saying, like, these guys don't know what the rules are. And one of them even said, like, if you don't know what the rules are, I'm paraphrasing here, then you're not the person I thought I knew. Like, they basically turned it on me and like made out that I was some sort of, I felt like they were making it out like I was some sort of, like I am, like an offender or something. And it's like, why can't you let someone try to make a somewhat nuanced, deeper point? But see, that's why you can't. That's why it has to be quick sound bites. Because if you try to make a longer, more nuanced, interesting point, you're at risk for being hung out to dry.
Did you see the documentary Best of Enemies about the Buckley Vidal debates?
Yes.
It's for people who haven't seen it, it's worth watching. It's good and it's bad in terms of the analysis. It's a documentary about the debates between William F. Buckley and Gore Vidal in the Democratic and Republican conventions of 1968. But the point that the film makes is that prior to those debates, there were correct me if I'm wrong, only 3 major television networks in the United States. Mm-hmm. And all of them operated around the sort of technocratic idea that they would be neutral. And as a result, all of them were very boring. And a lot of people didn't really care. And then those debates happened. The debates were a big coup for the network. I can't remember, was it ABC? I can't remember which network got the debates, but it was a big coup for them. And the debates became increasingly fiery. And the context surrounding them became increasingly fiery, both literally and figuratively, until eventually in the penultimate debate, Buckley snapped and called Vidal a queer and threatened to punch him in the face. Very famous, unfortunately, very famous moment in media history. But the point the documentary makes, even though I think a lot of the conclusions in it are a bit tendentious, is that was the moment when the media realized, aha, this is what we need, because we're a business, and this is what our business model should operate on. What's important and what gets ratings and what gets public attention and what gets eyes glued to the television is not serious, nuanced debate over black letter subjects or the intricacies of political affairs or whatever may or may not be happening in the White House. It's what people watch, what's inflammatory. And people watch for argument. People watch things that are sexy, that are juicy. And that incident was a perfect example. And that incident taught the media that lesson, and the media grasped onto it and never let go until things have, over time, declined more and more as the media has been forced, as television networks now have social media networks and podcasting and other alternatives to contend with that they didn't have back then. So the problem's been amplified.
It is amazing, though. Like, it tells you how much things have changed and how much Bill Buckley, the rules didn't apply to him, because I can't imagine if I called somebody on TV a gay slur and threatened to punch them. It's unclear. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be celebrated, not just by the conservative movement, but Buckley was sort of seen as this bon vivant on, enfant terrible.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and he would host like Norman Mailer and all these different people like on firing line. Like, I'm pretty sure if I did that today, I wouldn't be celebrated as this polysyllabic, intellectual who rides around on, who yachts and rides around like on mopeds or whatever.
Yeah. Well, certain yeah, maybe a fringe magazine on the right would celebrate you for it and would buy you a yacht to mark the success. Maybe Vidal would give you a home for that, Matt. But yes, otherwise, I don't think so.
All right. Well, I want to end it with RFK Jr. So up until now, I think we've all assumed that RFK Jr. had the potential of playing spoiler and helping Trump. But now there's evidence that he actually could be hurting Trump. So let me play this clip and we could talk about it.
Two-way ballot between President Biden and former President Donald Trump. Trump holds a 2-point lead within the margin of error. 46% of registered voters backing Trump, 44% for President Biden. But when the ballot is expanded to 5 candidates, President Biden is the one with a 2-point lead within the margin of error at 39%, Donald Trump at 37%, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at 13%. And what is notable is that there's a greater share of Trump voters in that 2-way ballot who end up backing RFK Jr. than Biden voters. And it is contrary to a lot of other polling that's out there, as well as the conventional wisdom that is the larger share of the third party vote would end up hurting President Biden. Well, in our poll, it shows it actually hurts Trump a little bit more, but with caveat, this is one poll and we'll continue to see if it reflects in other ones.
All right, so that's Mark Murray from NBC News. It's actually not just one poll guy. I've seen Marist, NBC, and Quinnipiac with similar findings. What do you make of it?
I mean, I think inherently RFK is at the advantage just because both of the major candidates are terrible. So for someone with the Kennedy name recognition and branding, and someone who is able to who can naturally build up a personality cult purely by extension of that, and as a result of that, it's natural that he'll be at an advantage. However, I think more specifically on the Trump point, what's interesting is that RFK, as far as the establishment is concerned, RFK is an outsider despite his heritage in much the same way that Trump is an outsider. I don't know if you saw that recent video where almost the entire Kennedy family came out and endorsed Biden and spoke in sort of implicit, derisive terms about RFK's candidacy. But the threat that RFK poses to Trump is no better exemplified than in what RFK represents. I mean, in terms of if you think about the coronavirus and what we went through in 2020, Trump was vehemently pro-vaccine immediately because Trump couldn't not be pro-vaccine because the vaccines were developed under his administration and he had to take the credit for it, and he wanted to get the pandemic under control so it wouldn't continue to jeopardize his campaign. And by extension, he had to acknowledge that coronavirus was real and that vaccines work and vaccines are real. Robert F. Kennedy never had to do that. And there was a lot of skepticism in the Trump base about that, a lot of hostility on the right to just the basic premise that COVID exists and COVID wasn't a giant scam that the Democrats put in place to cost Trump the race. And a lot of the wounds from that, the frustrations from that, are still very real. And if anything, have only been magnified in recent years, as for a lot of those same voters, Biden has set about systematically undoing everything that Trump did and continuing to scam and defraud them in a whole host of other ways, socially and politically and economically and so on. So for those voters who are frustrated, who are angry at the establishment, who feel like the establishment and the swamp and the deep state and all of these terms that we so often talk about have been screwing them and pulling the wool over their eyes for a long time. RFK is perhaps a safer way and also a more shocking and countercultural way of sticking up the middle finger than Trump is at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like my assumption has been Trump could only get 46 or 47% of the vote. Therefore, a third-party candidate will help him, right? Because the more candidates there are, the more likely you can win without getting to 50% plus one. And so my assumption was that RFK Jr. would allow Trump to win with just 46%. Additionally, it just seems like Trump has this weird magic effect where he gets lucky all the time. And so I feel like anything weird that happens in a race will redound to Trump's benefit. It's like a sort of paranoia that I have about it. But what you're saying, Guy, makes a ton of sense. I mean, if you're a conspiracy theorist who likes cult figures, you're not with Biden. You might be with Trump, and maybe you'll go over to RFK. So I guess all bets are off as to how this will shake out. Maybe now the real question is, how many states ballots will he even make it on? I don't even know. I think he's on a couple now. But, if he's on the ballot in Georgia and Arizona and Michigan, like that's a big deal. It really could be the difference in who wins and loses.
I think that's absolutely right. And with what the polling indicates, it isn't prudent for Trump and the Trump team to just ignore this. They're going to have to go on the offensive, and they're going to have to try and dispel the image that RFK has built up and the sway that RFK may hold on portions of the Trump base, which is not a position that Trump, I'm sure, would like to be in. Trump would rather think of this as inconsequential and not worth his time. But this is this is Robert F. Kennedy. It isn't Jill Stein. It isn't some no-name candidate. This is someone with a presence in political life and in cultural life who you can't quite swath away that easily.
All right, let's take a quick break because I want to tell you about a cool opportunity coming up on May 17th. It's called the Conservative Commentators Crash Course. If you've ever wanted to be a TV pundit, a commentator, a podcaster, a writer, you name it, this is your opportunity. It's going to be a small class. I think we're limiting it to something like 20 students this time. You'll be in a room with me in Arlington, Virginia, along with some other top experts talking about how do you break into this business and how do you stay in this business, which is arguably even harder. Check it out. Go to litraining.org. That's litraining.org. And I hope to see you on May 17th. And I wish I had the clip, but I don't. But Trump, when Trump is asked about RFK, he says, like, he's a good guy, but he's very liberal.
Yes.
Very liberal. But here's the problem. Trump has destroyed the idea that people care about issues, right? So it used to be like, he's for the fair tax, not the flat tax, so we can't vote for him. He's a lefty. He only wants to cut marginal tax rates by 2%. That used to be a thing, or at least we thought it was. Trump destroyed that. So I don't know that casting RFK as a liberal hurts him, right? Because as long as he's an outsider, then that's all that people care about. He's going to shake things up. He's not a politician. He doesn't feel like a politician. That's what matters.
Exactly. Well, knowing Trump, the strategy will be he's weak, he's frail, he's pathetic. Listen to his voice. Do you want someone with that voice to occupy the Oval Office? I'm sure that will end up, even if that isn't what Trump's advisors recommend, that will be the strategy that Trump employs in his speeches and on Twitter. And
I don't want to hear that for 4 years.
Exactly. No, exactly. And
I've heard Diane Rehm speak better. I mean, whatever. This is Trump. He can bring it. But I would say if he wants to say RFK's weak, the guy's kind of built. I mean, I know he could only do like 10 push-ups, but he's sort of ripped. Have you seen? He's cut. I mean, he's not as ripped as I am, but.
Well, that's quite true, Matt. No, I think absolutely. Well, it's it's so funny because Trump has never Trump has never exactly had an intimidating physical presence to oppose him on a debate stage.
He's big though. He is super tall. Not as tall as Barron, but tall.
Exactly. But when his current major Democratic opponent is Joe Biden, and his past major Democratic opponent was Hillary Clinton, he's never quite come up against an obstacle like this before. So undoubtedly, he'll adapt his tactics and his strategy by simply being as coarse and as crude in his attempts to undermine them as possible, because he has nothing else to fall back on.
This is why I always thought the Dems should recruit The Rock as their nominee, but because it is what's that Mike Judge movie? I can never think of the title.
Oh,
Idiocracy.
I know
Idiocracy,
what you mean.
Where a former professional wrestler becomes president, because of course that's the where this is all heading. Okay. Before we go, Guy, what have you been watching or listening to?
Have you seen Civil War?
No, I want to.
Is it worth seeing? I didn't like it very much. I wonder what people listening who may or may have seen it might have thought of it. I wasn't very taken with it. It's difficult to get into the. I don't want to ruin it for you. I think it is worth watching. It is worth trying, because it is very well made. It's beautifully shot. The way he plays with things like sound and photography, to sort of convey the horror and the sorrow and the harrowing nature of war is all very clever and interesting. What it really reminded me of, and this is a bit of a weird reference, I wonder if you've seen this or how many people will even remember that this is a thing that exists, was the Steven Spielberg remake of War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise in it, which I always quite liked. I don't know what the critics' consensus on that film is, but I always sort of enjoyed it because it's purely told from. What's unique about that movie is it's told from Tom Cruise's perspective. Tom Cruise plays sort of an everyman character who's trying to get his kids from, I think, Brooklyn into the northeastern countryside to escape an alien attack. But you don't see anything beyond what Tom Cruise sees. Everything you learn is what Tom Cruise learns. And so it's a very interesting way of telling that kind of story. Alex Garland tries to do the same thing in this, because you never really learn about the political context of why the Civil War is happening. You never really learn about what led up to it, because that isn't really what he's interested in exploring. It's not a political movie. I saw plenty of headlines and left-wing outlets about how it's all about the threat of Trump and so on, which is ridiculous. It's not. It's really what I took it to be about was this is what we talk so flippantly and so incautiously often about the notion of another civil war and how America is on the verge of another civil war and how we're heading toward a civil war. But in doing that, we very quickly and easily lose sight of what a civil war would actually look like, and what it would actually mean for this country and what war actually involves, because most of us have been spared actual involvement in a war for decades now. And he examines that in quite a brutal and powerful way until the ending and the final 20 or 30 minutes, which I won't spoil, but where I thought he completely undid all of that. And I thought the ending made no sense, was silly, and ran against everything thematic that he'd established beforehand, and kind of soured the whole thing for me. But I do still think it's worth watching, especially since this is a bit of a dead, dry spell for movies.
Speaking of Civil War, I finally finished Manhunt on Apple TV.
Was it good?
It's good. It's worth seeing. Not as good as the book, but worth seeing. But one thing I'd forgotten or just didn't even know was that Secretary of War Edwin Stanton barricaded himself in the War Department for like 3 months and refused to come out. This is after he had been fired by President Johnson, but he wanted to kind of continue doing Reconstruction. And it's a crazy thing to do. But it's one of those things that has reminded me that, like, well, things are crazy now, but we've had crazy times before. Could you imagine if like that happened today? It would be wild, but like, yeah, crazy times. But I think what happened is our recent memory, those of us who are, kind of grew up in the post World War II consensus, with the mainstream media,
right?
We haven't seen things like this. But if you go back to the Civil War, lots of crazy, weird stuff, including John Wilkes Booth, of course. I also I finished Ripley. I don't think I'd finished that last time we talked. I finished Ripley on Netflix.
Is it worth it?
I'm sorry?
Is it worth it?
I think so. I think so. It apparently hews much closer to the book, the 1950s novel, than the 1999 film, The Talented Mr. Ripley. It's incredibly different. The Talented Mr. Ripley had Matt Damon and Jude Law, and everyone looks good, and it's sunny, and like, this is a black and white film. It's a series, but it's all shot in black and white. It's beautiful in a very different way, and it's a very different interpretation, but a really interesting, I think, intriguing story. So I would recommend it. I also finished Regime, the Kate Winslet vehicle, which was good. And I just started the Ben Franklin, Michael Douglas thing. Too soon to say. It hasn't knocked my socks off yet, but I will keep you posted on that.
Wait, I want to make sure I heard that correctly. Michael Douglas plays Ben Franklin?
Unless I've made tragic mistakes in the past getting actors confused, but I think it is Michael Douglas. Yeah.
No, I love Ben Franklin and I love Michael Douglas, so now I'm intrigued.
This is he's the Basic Instinct guy, right?
Yes.
That's him. Okay, yeah, same guy.
Interesting. This is news to me. I had no idea that was out, and I'm going to have to look into it.
Yeah, this is on Apple TV too, and it's about Franklin. It starts with Franklin and his grandson traveling to France to try to talk the French into joining America in the Revolution.
Interesting.
So that's kind of, that's what it's about. So check it out.
How historically accurate is it, or does it seem? Because Manhunt, I heard, was quite extensively researched and based and grounded pretty strongly in the actual history of what happened.
Yeah, I think Manhunt took some artistic liberties, but by and large, it was historically accurate. So, like, one of the things in the movie, Stanton actually goes into, like, Maryland and Virginia as they track down Booth. Apparently, he never left D.C. He was kind of sending the orders, like, stuff like that, just done for artistic purposes. My sense so far is that Franklin is similar to that it'll take a few liberties, but in general, it is historic. So the hope is that you watch these things, that it inspires you to learn and read more, and whether that's Googling it or picking, I would definitely recommend the book Manhunt if you haven't read it. It's fabulous.
Matt, aren't you glad that we don't have to read nowadays? We can just watch fine television and listen to great programs like The Wrong Stuff.
That's right. And podcast. Yeah, check it out. Listen to, if you are watching us on YouTube, you can listen to us. The podcast is called The Wrong Stuff. If you are listening to us, then you could watch us at youtube.com/Matt Lewis. Either way, subscribe to both, like, rate, review, all that good stuff. And Guy, you know what time it is?
I have an inkling, but maybe you should cue me in.
It's cold gin time again.
And it is, as always, Matt, the only thing that'll keep you and I together.
That is right. Maybe not the only thing, because we both like to party all night, and we like to rock and roll all night and party every day. And we are against shooting dogs. Let the record state.
And goats. In the presence of, especially in the presence of school buses and construction workers. The most construction workers and school children, the two most sensitive groups in contemporary American life.
It's like, hey, keep it down, guys. There's sailors in here. We've got some Navy guys. All right, my friend. We'll see you back here on The Wrong Stuff next week.
Looking forward to it, Matt. Thank you as always.